Hi everyone, we've been looking at unsustainable use of resources in the world, and we're going to focus today on access to fresh water across the globe. First thing that I want you to do is to review the water cycle, and a good way to do that is to watch this clip on YouTube. So just go to YouTube, type in the water cycle song, and I want you to click on the one that has the picture that's shown on your page here. So listen to that song, it just goes for a couple of minutes. And in your book, I want you to write a heading, the water cycle, and write down the phases of the water cycle with a brief description of each. After you've done that, I want you to imagine that you're a drop of rain making your way through the water cycle. See if you can explain your journey from the sky to the ocean, and that should help you to understand what actually happens in the water cycle. I hope you enjoyed that water cycle song. We're going to have a look at how much water there actually is in the world, and we did talk about this briefly, but basically you've got water covering 71% of the Earth's surface, and we can tell that by having a look at a map. We can see that there's a lot of blue on a map, and well, definitely much more than what there is green, which is land. So we've got water covering 71% of the Earth's surface, and you can see that in the first bar graph that's there. But 97% of that is actually salty water, and we only end up with 3% that's fresh water that we can actually drink. From that 3%, if you go to the second bar graph, it shows you, and that's all fresh water there, we've got 68% that's frozen in ice caps, 30% that's in the ground, and that leaves us with just 1% that's easily accessible fresh water that we can drink. Of that fresh water, you'll see the breakup. You've got 87% in lakes, 11% in sort of swamps, and then 2% in rivers. So even though we've only got 1% of water that we can actually have access to, it still is plenty of fresh water. The problem is that we don't have the water distributed evenly around the world. So if you have a look in the picture, the map at the bottom, you'll see that there's plenty of fresh water in the northern hemisphere. The problem is that we don't have all the people living there. The southern hemisphere actually needs a bit of water as well. And we do have areas that are quite blue there, showing that we have a lot of water, but we also have areas of water stress. So the fact that we've got people and water unevenly distributed means that some places have a lot of water and some places don't have much at all. So you're probably wondering how much water you actually need per day to live. The figures are you need about 80 litres. That's to sustain a reasonable lifestyle where you can drink, you've got food to eat, and you can shower as well. The average consumption per person per day, so Madagascar 5.4 litres, so that's quite a lot less than your 80 litres, but in Australia some of us are using 500 litres per day. So have a look at your bar chart on the right hand side, and this is the average water used per person per day. So you'll see the US is listed there at around, I don't know, 575 litres per day. Then you've got Australia followed closely behind. So mostly developed countries up the top there, and our rich countries, so they obviously have access to water. As we get down the list, you'll see like halfway down you've got China, who are using less than 100 litres of water a day, and then you've got your African countries listed there as well. So 60% of the world's population have to actually get by on about an average of 50 litres per day, so that's about a tenth of what we here in Australia use. So I'll just have an example of where Australian water is used, and this is a Melbourne example in 2011 and 12. So you can see from the pie chart on the right that 65% of all the water used in Melbourne was actually for residential, so that's just for homes, 25% for factories, hospitals, businesses and things like that, and 10% was water that wasn't for, so that's burst water mains or firefighting or leaks and things like that. So of that 65% in residential, saying 40% is used in the bathroom, so obviously for showers and baths, brushing your teeth, 15 to 20% for laundry, which is just washing your clothes, and then another 10% in the kitchen, so washing your dishes, rinsing out your bowl, washing your vegetables. You'll remember that the water cycle is a closed loop, so you can't get any more water in, but what actually determines how much fresh water we've got, the first thing is precipitation. So you'll know from the song that that's rain, snow, sleet or hail. Now precipitation is really unevenly distributed across the world. Areas of high precipitation are often the low latitudes, and the opposite with the low precipitation, so that's in the desert and that's the high latitude. So some areas naturally have higher rainfall and some areas low rainfall, so that's determining the fresh water in that area. But the other thing that determines fresh water is evapotranspiration. So that's the combination of evaporation, so the water coming up from the ground, and transpiration, which is the water coming out of the trees. And you'll note there that warm areas have got higher evapotranspiration. So you're probably wondering why we don't have enough fresh water. So often we're in places where there's heavy rain, all that water just actually runs off. You'll notice when, even at school, when we have a lot of rainfall, a lot of that just washes away. It's not actually seeping into the ground because it's coming so heavy. You've also got some areas that just actually have low rainfall, like the desert, so they don't have water there, and that's just natural. So arid areas, which have got less than 300 millimetres of rain. You'll see in the picture they are indicated by the orange, so we know that's through the deserts, areas of the Sahara, in through Asia, and also have a look at the desert areas in Australia. So they just naturally don't have water there. But the other main reasons we're going to have a look at are variations to climate, land degradation, population growth, and pollution. We'll start with variations in climate. So a reason we don't have fresh water is because of drought, and drought happens when there is a below average precipitation. So obviously rain, snow, sleet, hail. You have droughts occurring quite frequently in African and Asian countries, and droughts can cause death because droughts mean that you can't grow food, you can't breed animals, and then people have to actually start going without food. The other variation in climate relates to floods. So floods is opposite of droughts, and that's when you've got well above average precipitation, also heavy storms, or when snow rapidly melts, or you have tidal waves. So when you have these floods, the water is often very polluted, and that can lead to outbreaks of disease, and you'll see this happening a lot in developing countries and places where they have floods. So they're saying that climate change is one of the main causes of why we're having an increase in the frequency and severity of climate things like droughts and floods. The second reason why fresh water is scarce is due to land degradation. We've talked a little bit in class already about this. So land degradation is caused by excessive destruction of natural vegetation, and that's through deforestation, like we saw in Borneo, overgrazing, so when you're putting lots of animals out, and obviously intensive farming like growing wheat, corn, rice. When the land's degraded, the soil can't actually store water, and you've also got then heavy rains which are just running off the land out to sea. They're not actually being absorbed into groundwater. So have a look at the picture of Australia on the right, and this is showing the amount of land degradation. So darker blue colours, there is severe land degradation there, so that's obviously through the Murray-Darling Basin. You also have a lot of moderate and light land degradation through built-up areas where we've got people living, and then through the desert areas and through the middle of Australia, the land hasn't been degraded there. Just pause for a minute and have a look at this map and have a read through some of the other areas in Australia that have been degraded through various reasons. The third reason that we say that water is scarce is because of population growth. And again, we've had a look at population. When you have rapid growth in population, there's pressure on fresh water because people just need more water, and they also need more food, which needs water to grow. So you're needing more water for agriculture, as I just said, growing food, also for industries and for domestic houses. So some of the countries with rapid population growth are India and Ethiopia. And remember, we had a look at that population chart where you can see real-time population growth. And the final reason why fresh water is scarce is due to pollution. So have a look at the picture on the right there. Obviously that water is very polluted. That reduces the amount of fresh water available. Also, taking lots of water out of rivers for irrigation, so for watering plants, you end up with less water in the river starts to flow more slowly, and then you've got the pollutants settling on the riverbed, and we saw that in the Aral Sea examples that we've looked at this week. So a lot of the rivers around the world, particularly in China, are actually too polluted to drink from, so people in those areas don't have much fresh water. What I want you to do this week is to actually ask your parents for the water bill. Have a look at your water bill, and on the back there'll be a graph which is telling you how much water that you're using. So find out how much water on average you use each day and try and work out what that means per person in your household. So I want you to write down those figures because I want you to bring them to class, and we're going to have a look at how much water we actually are using ourselves, and I'll bring in my water bill and we can compare and see how we can reduce the water that we're using in our homes. That's it for today. Please come to class with your notes on the water cycle, some notes based on the slides, and your water bill information.